Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're tearing down a massive piece of digital folklore. We're taking a really hard look at the myth of the lone creative genius behind Minecraft, which is, of course, the best-selling video game of all time. You know, we tend to think of legendary software as these pristine, perfectly engineered masterpieces handed down by solitary visionaries. But the reality of how this global phenomenon was actually built and who truly built it is a wild story. It's full of technical debt, community rebellion, and collective creation.
Let's jump right in with a pretty brutal quote from a fellow developer, Sir Compuan, who actually spent years reverse engineering the game. This really shatters that illusion of pristine game design, doesn't it? We idolize Marcus Notch, person, as this brilliant architect, but among the developers who actually had to read and maintain his original Java codebase, his core designs were famously flawed. And this isn't just internet complaining. It's a structural reality that forever altered how the game would be played, and more importantly, how it would be modified.
Section 1. The Lone Creator Myth.
So, back in the late 2000s, Notch was virtually the only individual imagining, coding, and updating Minecraft. He dropped the very first public alpha on an indie game forum in May 2009. Because of that solo act, the media and the community built up this huge mythology around him. They viewed him as the romantic author god. You know, a divinely inspired genius creating wholly original works from scratch. But the reality looks a lot more like what scholars call the scripter or the collective. The true development of Minecraft quickly shifted to thousands of players and modders who were out there hacking, mixing, and re-authoring the game together. The author wasn't one man, it was an entire ecosystem.
Now, before we completely write off Notch's coding chops, let's look at a very big number, $150 million. That's the estimated value placed specifically on Notch's original codebase by the time he stepped back. It proves a fundamental law of software studies. The primary imperative of code is execution and adoption. It's not pristine design. You literally don't need elegant architecture to build a global phenomenon. You just need an idea that captures the imagination.
Section 2. Unoptimized and ugly code. When actual professional software engineers popped the hood on those early versions, man, they found an archaeological dig of bad decisions. The game's foundation was loaded with immense technical debt. We're talking poor OpenGL practices that absolutely choked performance. The networking protocol was a total mess. There were literally 9 or 10 different ways just to encode a simple vector. He frequently misused signedness in the code, built flawed emulators, and fundamentally broke backwards compatibility 3 separate times. Developers who inherited this code openly called it slop. It was a nightmare of legacy routines that forced successive engineers to maintain highly unoptimized structures.
But, you know, there's a totally valid flip side to this, captured perfectly by a developer debating Notch's legacy on Hacker News. The crucial point is that this messy, ugly code actually shipped. Notch was exploring a completely new problem space. He wasn't building from a strict, rigid design document. He was experimenting. The code was held together with duct tape and string, but hey, it got millions of kids playing. However, that very same duct tape created an absolute brick wall for the players who wanted to expand the game themselves.
Section 3. The Obfuscation Barrier.
To make matters worse for the community that desperately wanted to fix, optimize, or expand the game, Mojang actively locked this messy code away. They never provided that official modding API they had been promising for years. Instead, they relied on obfuscation. Basically, that's the practice of intentionally jumbling and scrambling source code. Mojang did this to shrink the final Java jar files and to protect their intellectual property. But the side effect? It was immense. It erected a massive technical wall. It meant that any player who wanted to modify the game first had to become a digital archaeologist just to translate the scrambled bytecode back into something a human could even read.
I mean, just imagine trying to rewrite a game's physics engine when the variables are literally scrambled into wingdings and snowman symbols. The raw, optimized, compiled output of the game changed completely with every single major release. One day a function was called A, the next update it was called Z. It was a constantly moving target of absolute gibberish.
Section 4. Translating the code.
But players are stubborn, right? They didn't give up. Instead, they built a revolutionary solution to bypass this boundary and systematically translate the code. They layered human-readable text right over the alien machine code. First, you had the raw Notch mappings. Then, a developer named Serge created stable numeric identifiers so things wouldn't break every single update. Next, the community crowdsourced the MCP mappings, giving everything descriptive, human-readable names. Finally, modern communities created completely open-source yarn mappings. Deobfuscation literally became an act of collective authorship. They were out there rewriting the game's dictionary together.
Driven entirely by the necessity to fix the original broken architecture, the community's tools evolved at a crazy speed. Back in 2009, it was the wild west of jar modding. By 2010, the Mod Coder Pack came along and automated the translation of that obfuscated code. And by 2011, developers like Eloram and Spacetoad created Minecraft Forge. But to really appreciate what Forge did, you have to understand how painful that 2009 era actually was.
In those early jar modding days, players had to use this incredibly destructive, totally incompatible procedure. You had to physically overwrite the game's base code and manually delete the meta-inf security folder. The massive problem here was compatibility. If two mods tried to edit the exact same file, the game would just completely crash. It was this exact friction that naturally forced competing developers to finally collaborate on unified API solutions like Forge, pooling their edits into a single shared library.
Section 5. Collective Reauthoring.
Since Mojang never actually delivered that official modding API, everyday players stepped up. They went from merely playing a sandbox game to collectively reauthoring its very foundation. They were no longer just consumers, they were active producers. This created what media researchers call a proto-sig ecosystem. It's a deeply interconnected world where players naturally evolve into creators, then into modders, and ultimately they cross that boundary to become developers themselves. In fact, Mojang ended up officially hiring several of these community modders, like Sarge, just to help them untangle the messy code.
By working together through these intense technical hurdles, the community completely automated deobfuscation. They established shared libraries, and they provided massive alternatives to Mojang's top-down updates. They fundamentally transformed Minecraft. It went from a solitary developer's rigid, buggy software into a massive, open-ended platform for cultural production. They treated it like a foundation to build entirely new games upon.
Which brings us to this really profound realization from the academic research on the game. Minecraft is not complete. The game's inherent incompleteness, its bugs, its lack of an API, and the severe friction of its obfuscated code. Honestly, these were actually the greatest gifts Notch could have ever given the community. The void in the software actively demanded to be filled by human collaboration.
So, I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. We spend so much time in tech striving for flawless architecture and perfectly optimized systems. But if Notch had actually built a pristine, impenetrable, heavily locked-down engine from day one, leaving absolutely no gaps for players to fill, would this incredible decade-spanning community even exist today? Keep wondering about that. And next time you load up a modded game, remember the digital archaeologist who made it possible. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.